Welcome to Gold Derby's Meet the Experts panel for documentary films. I'm Charles Bright, and I am joined by Traci Curry and Stanley Nelson, the directors of the Showtime documentary Attica, which recently made the Oscars shortlist for documentary feature. Stanley, I want to start with you. Do you have any memories of seeing or hearing about the Attica prison riot at the time it was happening in 1971?
Yeah, I have kind of a vague memory. I mean, I was 19, 20 years old, so I was a cognizant adult, but I didn't know the details, and I don't think the details of it really ever came out at that point. You know, we knew there was a riot. It was kind of a day-by-day thing, and then it was like, oh no, they went in and just killed a whole bunch of people. But we never knew really why the rebellion happened, and we never knew why they kind of went in with guns blazing.
And Traci, I'm curious because I know you were born after the riot happened, and I was curious, how did your perspective of this come into view from what you knew about it before embarking on this journey of making this film to completion?
Yeah, so when Stanley first asked me about working on the film, I, heard the word Attica, and I thought first what I think a lot of people probably think when they first heard of Attica, which is Dog Day Afternoon, and that scene. I think I was curious about what was it about this word and the event that was attached to it that was so resonant in the culture and was just so profoundly impactful that the mere mention of it, right, in this scene could sort of evoke all that they were trying to do there. And so when I first began digging into the research, it was a bit mind-blowing to find out that I and so many people knew nothing about what a civilian commission called the single deadliest day of state violence against American people outside of the Civil War and the wars on indigenous people. So that was shocking. And as we went through the process of digging more and more into the story and making the film, it was just mind-blowing to know that this event happened and so few people knew about it.
And I also want to ask you something else, Traci. Did you find that the former inmates were eager to talk about their experiences during the riot?
I don't know that I would use the word eager. I mean, I think, originally, as you can imagine, this was a profoundly traumatic event for everybody that experienced it. They weren't necessarily initially jumping at the opportunity to kind of tell a complete stranger all the gory details of this quite frankly, humiliating and enraging event that is an unhealed trauma for all of these folks. But as we began to have more conversations and they started to open up, and I, tried to be as transparent as I could with everyone in the film about what Stanley and my intentions were, it really all started coming out. And it was just very clear that all of those feelings and memories, not only for the prisoners, but for all of the people that you see in the movie, were still very present with them and very much there at the surface. So once we kind of got through some of that initial trust and kind of getting to know you, yes, everyone was very, very willing and happy to kind of talk about what happened to them.
And Stanley, I was curious about sort of the same question, but on the other end with the families of people, of the guards who would work there, and especially the ones who were killed during the raid on the prison. Was it difficult to convince them to be a part of this, or were they very willing to tell their stories?
I wouldn't say willing. I think that there are a certain number of people who were willing to talk about it from Attica, the town. I think there was a certain number of people also that just would not talk about it. Traci kind of got all the people to interview, so she knows better the hesitation that people had. But we got more than enough to talk about it. So that's a central element in the film, is that it's not only the prisoner's story, it's not only the observer's story, but it's also the guard's story and the guard's family story.
And Stanley, another question that I have for you is, do you think that the fact that the most deaths, that most of the deaths that happened during that riot came at the hands from those in authority positions, and I guess I can't remember, it was the National Guard that stormed the facility?
It was the state troopers and prison guards. The National Guard were really used as medical help.
Okay, so these people in positions of actual authority were that most of the deaths came from their hands. Do you feel like that's been forgotten in history?
Yeah, I mean, I think that all the deaths on the last day came from from law enforcement. All the deaths. So let's be clear. I think that one of the things that happened is that the first reports came out, and the first reports were that the inmates had slit people's throats and had killed people, and we have national news broadcasts in the film that say that. And then afterwards, when the medical examiner examined the dead, they found that no throats were slit, but it had already come out. So kind of the retraction is never as forceful as seen by as many people. And so till today, I think people think that the prisoners killed people on that last day, and no prisoners killed anybody on that last day.
And Traci, I'm curious as to what did you find it was universal from the family members of the people who had been killed during that last day? Was it pretty universal that they held law enforcement responsible for this, and they didn't even want, for a lot of them, they didn't even want compensation, right? They wanted an acknowledgement and an apology.
Yeah, well, remember, these are the families of prison guards, and there were some prison guards that were part of that force that went in, and there were also people in these families who had relatives that were part of the state troopers. So I wouldn't necessarily say that any of them would have pointed the finger at the individual members of law enforcement. However, they are very clear that Nelson Rockefeller was to blame. They're very clear that their lives had no more value in his eyes than did the lives of the prisoners who were killed. And they're very clear that they have been harmed by the state of New York, and that there has not, even 50 years later, been any justice for the harm that was done to them by the state. So I would say that, yes, they're all in agreement, and in agreement with if there's any point of agreement between the families and the prisoners, it would be about that, and the abuse of power from the state of New York, for which there was never any redress for any of them.
And one last question that I have for you, Traci, and Stanley, please feel free to elaborate on this as well. There are so many lessons to take away from this documentary, but what do you think is the most important one above all others to be taken away after viewing this?
I think, especially given where we find ourselves today, right, in this moment where there's this highly visible and vocal pushback against the state abuse of power through law enforcement. I think ultimately the takeaway is to understand that this is ultimately a story that continues to this day about what happens when people make a just and righteous challenge to the power and the abuse of the state's authority, and the lengths to which the state and the government will go in order to reassert that power in the face of those challenges. And I think it was very clear then, it's very clear now, and I think the film invites us to really think about and consider that today.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really clear in the film that these prisoners, our former prisoners, are human beings, and that we have to think about them as human beings, and that we have to think about the fact that the prison system has exploded, since 1971, and it's only gotten worse. It's not like it's gotten a lot better in prisons, that and there are people who are trapped in prisons, and we don't think about them. And I think it's really important that we think about them and see them as human beings.